to a psychologist's casual review. And today we're going to be reviewing a book that's very, very important to me. As at the time in my life, I had a lot of doubts in regards to my profession, of what to do, what to not do, trying to find answers that I could not just find with people that I knew, or even at the time my mentors, things that I really, really needed to understand. And this book, The Gift of Therapy by Irvin Yalom, was the book that helped me out immensely. It helped me out on so many aspects that it's hard for me to just do a short video. I've started this video 3 times over just because it's that hard for me. But it's a wonderful book. If you're trying to be a therapist, if you're thinking about it, if it's even just in your mind, not necessarily concretely you're enrolled in any training or anything, just you're thinking about it, read this book. This book is an absolute must-read, as it is a collection of 85 advices. I'm not sure you say the plural, but anyway, bad luck. And those advices are just incredible, because basically Yalom has when he wrote the book, he had 60 years of practice behind him, I think, maybe 50, but an enormous amount of practice. And basically he saw so many movements within psychotherapy, starting with psychoanalysis, Gestalt, CBT, and he basically lived through all of them. And he's still alive now, at least at the moment I'm making this video. And basically he's still seeing patients at 90 and above, and I find that incredible. Of course, he's not doing it full time, and I think he only sees 1 or 2 patients a day, but that's still incredible. I mean, in your 90s, that's genuinely impressive. And he's never lost his passion, and you can see that even in modern day interviews of 2016, 2017, he still is very, very passionate. And that passion is clearly in the book, and that's what makes it an incredible read, because he's going to give you that advice, but he's not just going to give you in a dogmatic manner. He's going to say why you shouldn't do it, and basically give you an example of when it works, and also when he commits mistakes. And that's very, very helpful, I feel, because basically a lot of books, at least in psychology, are always presented in such a way that the person that writes them is that beyond making mistakes kind of therapist. Things that are, oh well, I wouldn't have done that, or I know, I am the subject that knows, to take a Lacanian expression. And that's not what Yalom, he's very genuine, very honest, very, what you see is what you get. At least that's how the book feels. And it was a relief, because basically he does give things that allow you to kind of bend the dogma you were taught. For example, if you were taught in a very classic psychodynamic style, like I was, there are things like being a blank screen. A patient must be able to project everything onto you. If he had, let's say, an appalling parents, well, you become the appalling parent, and that's it. Or he had this, then you become that, and that's how it works. He has to be able to project. He must know nothing of you. And that seems fine. In theory, you're oh yeah, that makes sense. But, the big but, and something that I think should be completely reshaped, at least in terms of psychodynamic training, is that that's not what the patient is coming for. The patient is coming for a relationship. Of course, a professional and therapeutic relationship, which is no friendship, no partnership, no anything else of that ilk. But it's a relationship. And in that relationship, it's not just about the patient projecting his mental life onto you. It's also you being able to take it in, transform it, and restitute something to him. And that's what's very important, is that basically it has to be a genuine relationship, meaning that you can't just say nothing for 45 minutes to an hour and just say, yeah, good, stop. Yalom says that it was the start of psychoanalysis, the real boom, but it was not the way to go, at least not for him. And he was very, very honest by saying that it helped him, but it helped him only basically when the therapist broke the rule of the blank screen. When she said things I agree with you, or yes, everyone has the spiteful feelings. Everyone's like that. Or those are moments where he basically felt helped and he felt that it had really helped him go beyond. And that's the other thing, is that basically the whole point of therapy is to help people go beyond what they are stagnating at. And that can be a whole range of problems and issues. It's not just one thing, it's everything. It's so multifaceted that's what makes it passionately interesting. At least that's how he feels, and I completely agree with him. Another very interesting point is that basically he makes the case that you shouldn't give a diagnosis to someone and to keep it for the insurance companies if you're American, because if you're European or from somewhere else, we don't work the same way. But for the Americans, they have to give diagnosis for reimbursement of treatment. Well, basically, he said that you should never just give a diagnosis, or at least if you have to the patient, explain that it's only a bit of what the person is, but it doesn't define him. It's just like how we organize our knowledge, our clinical knowledge, but it's not the truth. It's not something that the patient just is beyond compare. That's just something he has in a way. And I found that was very good. That basically I do agree that often diagnosis does get it into the way of working, as it can become an identity, and when it does become an identity, it can be harder to work on, I feel, and that's what he states also. And by experience, as I was saying, I do agree with that it's something that needs to be really, it can't just be thrown out like that. It has to be really be thought of and explained, and really not reducing, not limiting to the patient. Even if the diagnosis is severe mental illness such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, it's important to give the diagnosis, of course, but it's always very important to talk about it, not just give it in like a splash, like a rock within the middle of a pond. It has to be smoothed in. Anyway, coming back to the book. The book is very, very helpful, especially when you're starting off, as it gives you the advice, very practical advice. Like, for example, insist on the here and now. There's a point of emergency in therapy. You have to deal with it. You can't just go back to the past because it's what you think you should do. It's the here and now that takes precedent. Then after that, a work on the past is possible. He calls that an emergency point, and I think I agree with the whole premise of basically people are going to come in with the here and now within their relationships, within their jobs, within their hobbies, but it's not going to be, very rarely, someone that's going to come in and say, I want to talk about when I was 3 years old and this happened to me. It's very, very rare. So therefore you have to use the here and now. You have to solve it in a way, or at least give something of an understanding and of a path for the patient to be able to walk it, and then when he's better, to be able to go back to those early childhood memories, because they're still very important and it's still determinant in one's life and in one's personality. But those things are not necessarily what is going to be at the forefront, at least at the start. And that was a very, very important, I felt, advice. There's also the advice of not letting yourself basically be a cold or disingenuous. That you have to be genuine. You have to be, because the person is looking for a relationship, not just a blank screen, as I was saying earlier. Basically, there's also the whole point of existentialism, which is very transparent, and I felt that was one of the best discoveries of this book, as I had known about existential philosophy a bit, but I had never linked it to psychotherapy, and Yalom does the link, and he does it brilliantly. Even if he was not the first, he was the one to really, I feel, popularize it, and that's through him that I learned about people like Rollo May, Bingswanger, and even Karen Horney, as basically they have fallen out of fashion, at least in France. So I was it was a wonderful discovery, because he also states that basically there are givens in the human existence. This is not about psychopathology, and it's not about the distinct, very specific cases. It's something that universally we all have, being the fear of death, isolation, freedom and liberty, and meaning and meaninglessness. Those are things we are all confronted to, something that we all have to have answers to, get answers in our lives, or at least believe in something, or believe in answers to those questions. As that doesn't mean that you have to be religious or anything, but that just means you have to come to terms with them, and you have to think about them. You can't just dodge them your whole life. And that's the whole interesting point, is that he says we have to talk about these things with our patients, as these are fundamentals of our human existence that need to be talked about, that need to be guided, as we are all confronted with them. And those sins, those 4 elements that I stated, must be upheld in order to have good enough existence. He doesn't say good enough, I'm saying it. But that's the idea, that since we go forward also by confronting those 4 elements and coming to terms with them, or finding an answer, for example, in terms of meaning or liberty. And I felt that was very, very important, as it's, in a way, it brings us also beyond childhood and beyond the psychodynamic frame that we often have. We have that moment, basically, where we have those elements, those 4 main elements that basically need thinking, and something that is also a path we can always go through, regardless of the patient, because all patients have them. So it's something worth exploring, worth keeping in mind, and worth going with the patient. And we go through that process by psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is the goal, is the path rather than the goal, but the goal is for the person to feel better, to be able to take responsibility, to be able to live their lives as they see fit, and not being just pressurized by others or by the past. And it's a way of finding freedom. And that's another interesting thing that I found very interesting, but perhaps a little cheeky, is that Yalom does not fundamentally believe in CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. He says that those therapies are far too brief and do not really go into the meat of humanity, rather it stays on the surface, and he is incredibly skeptical of them. And he even says that all the patients he's had who have been professional CBT experts, be it psychologists, psychiatrists, and so on and so forth, well, they all went to see him because they wanted something longer. They all felt that CBT was lacking, and he does say cheekily that it's maybe not so much a random feat that they all come to see me, or at least the long therapies, because they feel that it's lacking. So he's very cheeky about it, right? He doesn't say it's the truth. He doesn't try, but he does imply something. I don't necessarily agree with that, as I think a lot of people can be helped by CBT, but I do think that long-term therapies are valuable in a world where we tend to say that they're useless, that they've never helped anyone, which is untrue. I think that it's nice to hear from time to time that it's useful, and that it's a path worth building, or at least walking down to. And basically, he also states things that are very, very important, that it's something that's always going to be in a direction. It doesn't just stop at therapy, that it has to have some form of benefit within one's life and outside of the therapist's office. And that's something that's very important too, because it can't just be within one's mind. It has to deliver some form of results, some form of betterment within the life of the patient. It's not just there for the theory of it or for the fun of it. And another thing that I really liked is the use of dreams within psychotherapy, something that I've talked about in this channel, but I'm a firm believer on that dreams are royal road to the unconscious, to use Freud's expression. But beyond that, it's also a way for the clinician to understand certain sins, and for the patient, a way to metabolize and transform certain sins that has happened to him, or that he fears will happen to him within himself. And it's a very transformative process. And he does say that it's very, very good. But he does state that you can't analyze fully a dream. Like, it's bits and pieces that you can use, but don't waste your time trying to go for every single explication, every single symbol, every single detail. That's a waste of time. Just the general idea is good enough. And that's very interesting, I feel. Even though I like going into the detail, it is also good sometimes to zoom out and say, oof, we're just going to go for the general picture here. And basically, that's what I took out of the book. And it has a lot of very interesting advice I did not talk about. And so much left to just talk about, as it's a 300-page book, at least in the French edition. So there's a lot to cover, and I'm not going to cover all of it. I'm just going to say that if you're anywhere interested in psychotherapy, even if you're doing brief-term psychotherapy, I really think you should basically give it a read. And basically, it's just so liberating to read, because he also talks about disclosure, meaning that you don't have to be a blank screen, but you can share certain things, namely emotions or even parts of your life, if you think it's going to help the patient, which is a big change from psychodynamic psychotherapy. But he does say that it has to be within a certain limit. So yes. So this was basically one of the books that helped me the most, perhaps the book that helped me the most with my practice, with all my patients, be it in institution or in my office. So I hope you found the review interesting, and I hope, if you're willing to, that you will engage in the comments. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.